Yogi Janavallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Brajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanacharya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Vishnu Paramahansa Swavaraj Child, please with AC. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Namacharya Thakur ki jai, Prem Sagaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasti Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai, Shri Sri Radha Krishna Gopa Govida Shyama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan ki jai, Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai, Navadip Dham ki jai, Ganga Jamuna Tulsi Bhakti Devi ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Go Premanandi. All glories to some of the devotees, all glories to some of the devotees, all glories to some of the devotees, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Guranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Are we there? Okay. Srila Prabhupada continued to accelerate. After the first initiations and the first marriage, he was eager for the next step. He was pleased by what he had, but he wanted to do more. This was the greed of the Vaishnava. Not a greed to have sense gratification, but to take more and more for Krishna. He would go in like a needle and come out like a plow. That is to say, from a small, seemingly insignificant beginning, he would expand his movement to tremendous proportions. At least that was his desire. He was not content with his newfound success and security at 26th 2nd Avenue, but was yearning to increase ISKCON as far as possible. This had always been his vision, and he had written it into the ISKCON Charter to achieve real unity and peace in the world, within the members and humanity at large. Swamiji gathered his group together. He knew that once they tried it, they would love it, but it would only happen if he personally went with them. Washington Square Park was only half a mile away, maybe a little more. Ravinder Swarup. He never made a secret of what he was doing. He used to say, I want everybody to know what we are doing. Then one day, D-Day came. He said, we're going to chant in Washington Square Park. Everyone was scared. You don't just go into a park and chant. It seemed like a weird thing to do. But he assured us, saying, you won't be afraid when you start chanting. Krishna will help you. And so he trudged down to Washington Square Park. But we were very upset about it. Up until that time, we weren't exposing ourselves. I was upset about it, and I know that several other people were, to be making a public figure of yourself. With Prabhupada leading, they set out on that fair Sunday morning, walking the city blocks of 2nd Avenue to Washington Square in the heart of Greenwich Village. And the way he looked, just by walking, he created a sensation. None of the boys had shaved heads or robes, but because of Swamiji, with his saffron robes, his white pointy shoes, and his shaved head held high, people were astonished. It wasn't like when he would go out alone. That brought nothing more than an occasional second glance. But today, with a group of young men hurrying to keep up with him as he headed through the city streets, obviously about to do something, he caused a stir. Tough guys and kids called out names, and others laughed and made sounds. A year ago in Butler, the Agarwals had been sure that Prabhupada had not come to America for followers. He didn't want to make any waves, Sally had thought, but now he was making waves, walking through the New York City streets, headed for the first public chanting in America, followed by his first disciple. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Prachadane Nirvishesha Shunyavani Pastatadesha Tarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktivinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Quoting from Srimad Bhagavatam 4, chapter 27, verse 6. Tasyam ajanayat putran puranjanyam puranjanaha sachan ekadasa virad ayushoradam atha jagat. Mataji? Dasyam, within her, Ajanayat, he begot Putran, sons, Puranjanyam, in Puranjani, Puranjana, King Puranjana, Shatani, hundreds, Ekadas, 11, Virat, O king, Ayusha, of life, Ardham, half, Atta, in this way, Atyagat, he passed. Translation. The great sage Narada then addressed King Prachinabadhisha. Oh, one whose lifespan is very great. In this way, King Paranjana begot 1,100 sons within the womb of his wife Paranjani. However, in this business, he passed away half his lifespan. Purport: in this verse, there are several significant words, the first of which are Ekadashatani. Paranjana had begotten 1,100 sons within the womb of his wife, and thus passed away half his life. Actually, every man follows a similar process. If one lives for 100 years at the utmost in his family life, he simply begets children up to the age of 50. Unfortunately, at the present moment, people do not even live 100 years. Nonetheless, they beget children up to the age of 60. Another point is that formerly people used to beget 100 or 200 sons and daughters, as will be evident in the next verse. King Paranjana not only begot 1,100 sons, but also 110 daughters. At the present moment, no one can produce such huge quantities of children. Instead, mankind is very busy checking the increase of population by contraceptive methods. We do not find in Vedic literatures that they ever used contraceptive methods, or they were begetting hundreds of children. Checking population by contraceptive method is another sinful activity, but in this age of Kali, people have become so sinful, they do not care for the resultant reactions of their sinful lives. King Paranjana lay down with his wife, Paranjani, and begot a large number of children. And there is no mention in these verses that he used contraceptive methods. According to the Vedic scriptures, the contraceptive method should be restraint in sex life. It is not that one should indulge in unrestricted sex life and avoid children by using some method to check pregnancy. If a man is in good consciousness, he consults with his religious wife, and as a result of this consultation with intelligence, one advances in his ability to estimate the value of life. In other words, if one is fortunate enough to have a good, conscientious wife, he can decide to, by mutual consultation, that human life is meant for advancing in Krishna consciousness and not for begetting a large number of children. Children are called parinama, or byproducts, and when one consults his good intelligence, he can see that his byproduct should be the expression of his Krishna consciousness. So, continuing in the vein of the previous verses, we see here how King Paranjana lived in illusion, overcome by the attractive features of his wife, and he began to produce a lot of children, thousands of children, and in this way used up half his life. If we look in the Dharma scriptures, we see that a householder should raise his children. First, he should get married and raise children. And then, when the children are grown up, and he's about 50 years old, and his hair is getting gray, he should take vanaprastha. So this is the ashram after Grihastha ashram. In other words, he spends some time raising a family and taking care of his wife, but then his goal is to renounce all that at a certain stage. This sounds a little disastrous because the goal of marriage is to break up the marriage finally and renounce it. But this indicates that the goal of that varnashram system, even though it's not direct bhakti, is an attempt to create a sense of detachment in the householder. As I mentioned previously, brahmachari life was there in the beginning in order to instill a sense of detachment in a person. After that, they're allowed to get married. But then after that, again, they have to renounce married life. But because it is an extreme renunciation, the process is gradual. So they don't renounce everything, but they renounce the house and the children, at least. So that is vanaprastha. So the husband does not have to renounce the wife. Right? So that's the concession in vanaprastha life. And that whole vanaprastha life is an effort so that the person can become detached from all of his experiences in household life. And thus there is an emphasis on austerities. If we look in the Bhagavatam and the Smriti scriptures, we'll see that the life of the vanaprastha is very severe. They have to live in the forest and eat roots and fruits and sleep on the ground and wear bark clothing, etc. So it's a very harsh type of life. And in the modern world, people will be horrified by such a life. But it's commonly mentioned in all the different scriptures. So it is an attempt to transform the person and have that person give up their attachments after they've accrued attachments in vanaprastha life. And from this we understand that the Vedic literature regards all of this as some sort of trap. The whole of life is a sort of trap, and we have to become detached from everything. But at the same time, it also recognizes that most people cannot do that, renounce their whole life. So therefore, this concession of grihastha life is there. And there's a certain amount of period, let's say from 20 to 50. So you got 30 years to carry out your sense gratification in a limited degree. And then you start renouncing again. In that household life, it is not unlicensed sense gratification, as Prabhupada also points out in the purport. There are restrictions and rules for that household life so that things are not out of control. And if one follows those rules properly, then one can reach the stage where one is ready for renunciation in the form of vanaprastha life. But if one doesn't follow those rules, then it's not really grihastha life at all. It's what we call grihamedi life, attachment in household life. And it'd be very difficult for that person to later on become vanaprastha. So therefore, even the grihastha life, though it does give this license for enjoyment in the world, it has its restrictions. The restrictions, of course, are different for different varnas. So the most restriction is on the brahmana and the least restriction on the sudra. But nevertheless, there's restrictions on everybody. And by following these restrictions, then one can gradually renounce material life and become qualified for spiritual life. So the vanaprastha is his attempt is there to become detached from household life by doing austerities, tapas. Once he's got rid of that attachment to household life, then he's qualified for the next step, and that is sannyas, where he gives up the wife and he lives alone. And the purpose of this is not austerity, but meditation on Supreme Lord. So that can only be accomplished once he's given up all of his material attachments. So that is, you can say, the supreme position, to simply meditate on the Supreme Lord or do devotional service. So that's the final conclusion of all of that after this whole process of brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas, just to meditate on the Supreme Lord. But it is a very difficult process to follow, and most people don't do it, especially in the modern world. It's difficult. Even 500 years ago, most people didn't follow. How many sannyasis were there? There were certainly so many brahmanas in Navadvip, but hardly any of them became sannyasis. So even in 500 years ago, to go through this whole system and then finally take sannyas was only done by a few, very few brahmanas. What to speak of today? So today also, these ashrams are still there, but very few people take them up. We have the Sri Sampradaya, which I don't know how many, what's the population of Sri Sampradaya in South India, whatever? So many millions, at least a few million. How many sannyasis are there? 5? 5 or 6. 5 or 6 out of millions of people. So it's quite rare in the modern world. But it was even rare in Lord Chaitanya's time. Not everybody, the Brahmanas, the Navadvip, they take sannyas. So it was difficult then. What to speak of now? But then the whole goal is to start worshiping the Lord full time. So it looks like that system, that way of producing a Vaishnava by going through that system is not very practical for us in Kali Yuga. And that is why Lord Chaitanya has presented a movement that does not rely on varnas or ashramas in order to advance. As I mentioned previously, actually, the varna ashrama is in the gunas, and ultimately we do nishkama karma yoga. Whenever we get to sattva gun, then we can start, studying scripture and renouncing, etc. But it's still in the gunas. But to progress through the gunas is a very difficult process, a long process. It's a long process of giving up material attachments. So the people in Tamagun have the most attachments, people on Sattvagun have the least attachments. But just to get from a lot of attachment to little attachment will take you, I don't know, 100 lifetimes maybe. If that system is still intact, if the Varna system is intact after 100 generations, you may get up to be a Brahmana from a Sudra level. But it takes a long time just to get that far. So then there's going to be very few people in Satgun and very few people becoming Vaishnavas as a result of that. But the Supreme Lord wants everybody to take up the process of bhakti and attain prema and go to the spiritual world. So he provides methods for even the people of Kali Yuga. And thus we have two things. One, of course, is the process of bhakti becomes open to everyone, even though it requires faith. And the other is, in bhakti, he has emphasized chanting of the holy name as the process, which is also beyond all, say, limitations. But more than the other processes of bhakti, it requires less qualification and quicker advancement, quicker purification, so we can attain prema. The only restriction on chanting the holy name is that if we want to advance through bhakti to prema by chanting the name, we have to chant purely. That's the qualification. So how do we chant purely? To do that, we need knowledge. So, which means scriptures, which means association of devotees. So, along with the chanting of the holy name, we need devotee association and studying, hearing the scripture. Very essential for pure name. If you don't want pure name, fine. You can do namabhas and you can get something, but you don't get prema. But Lord Chaitanya has encouraged us to go for the highest goal of that is prema. So therefore, along with the chanting, we also have the process of studying scripture and devotee association. And we see that even in the life of Lord Chaitanya. So though he says, Harinam Evikevalam, well, just chant the holy name, he ordered his followers, the Goswamis in Vrindavan, to write scriptures for people. They could just chant the holy name, do kirtan, but they didn't. He said, you write scriptures so that people get knowledge. So, and they spent a lot of time writing these books, like Dr. Rasamrita Sindhu, commentaries on the Bhagavatam, etc. So, though the holy name is independent of everything, if we want prema, we do need that knowledge. We do need scripture. And this is, even now, this is an outstanding feature of our movement in ISKCON. We have books. Most movements don't have books. They don't even refer to books. In fact, scripture is not considered to be something that's, very praiseworthy. Rather, if you start quoting scripture, it's more like that's a limitation on everything. So, on the other hand, we see in ISKCON, there's a great emphasis upon scripture. And we see that Srila Prabhupada spent, even though he is traveling around the world so many times in like 7 years, 7 times around the world in 7 years, when he was doing that, he spent a lot of his time translating and commenting on Srimad Bhagavatam and other scriptures. And then he established, apart from ISKCON, a whole trust, the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, to preserve and print these books and keep them alive. Yeah? So he put a great emphasis upon scripture also. And he's not alone, because we see that was also the nature of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He wanted people to get knowledge. So he took Bhaktivinoda's work. Bhaktivinoda was a prolific writer. So he took all of his works and began publishing those works. He took other works that were like Chaitanya Charitamrita, he published them. Not only that, then he had like a monthly newspaper, or I guess newsletter we'd call it. He had printing presses, so many printing presses they bought. And he was printing a monthly newsletter and a weekly newsletter and a daily newspaper. 3 things going on with printing, so people can get knowledge. So it's very enthusiastic to spread that knowledge to everybody. So along with the chanting, we do need some knowledge. And all of these attempts of Bhakti, Vinod Thakur and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Prabhupada are there too. Give us a firm basis of knowledge by which we can advance in devotional service. So that doesn't mean that we neglect the holy name and just study scriptures. That also is not proper. The 2 things go together. So we have the scriptures, Shravanam process, and we also have chanting the holy name. Yeah? So that Shravana process will support the holy name. And the result of that is we can chant purely. We do have a misconception about pure bhakti and pure name. And of course, there's a justification in one sense. That is that pure bhakti means prema. That's true. In prema, there are no anarthas. There is no ahankara. There are no karmas. There's no vasanas. Completely everything for Krishna. Atma's there, no identity with the material body or the subtle body. So, yes, it's pure bhakti. But as we see in Nectar Devotion, Rupa Goswami defines pure bhakti, but then he says it has three types: sadhana, bhava, and prema. So in sadhana bhakti, you also do pure bhakti if you want to get to bhava and prema. So therefore, even if we are not completely pure, that is, we have anartas, and just beginning bhakti, with shraddha, we begin bhakti, we should actually begin bhakti with pure bhakti. Once we are qualified with faith, getting mercy of devotees who practice pure bhakti, and our consulting scriptures, then we begin the process of pure bhakti, and this will lead to bhava and prema. And how do we do that? We get the knowledge. So that's why Srila Prabhupada gave all these books, even in the beginning of the movement. So when he was in New York City, then he was typing out manuscript for Bhagavad Gita, and then eventually got published. So in the very beginning, he was establishing knowledge is very important for our devotional progress. So what this knowledge does, of course, is two things. One is it prevents aparads, which are very disastrous for chanting. Secondly, with that knowledge, we get a clear idea of the Supreme Lord and the jiva and the process of bhakti, so that we can perform our bhakti with no mixture of material desires or the desire for liberation. Basically, that's the whole purpose. So, and if we do that, that is called pure bhakti. And if we begin bhakti with that particular definition, then gradually the impurities, the anartas, the ahankara, and the karmas will get destroyed. But it's called pure bhakti, even at that beginning stage. So we should not think that, well, I can only do pure bhakti when I'm in prema. And then what do we do in sadhana? Impure bhakti, mixed bhakti. Yeah? But if you do that mixed bhakti in sadhana, you don't get prema. That's the problem. So that's why you say from the beginning, you do that uttama bhakti. So scripture is important to give us, help us attain that purity in our intentions, even if we're not pure. We have the pure intentions there, pure goal in mind. So that's the sum and substance of all that knowledge. So though we do have many books, and it may look very complicated and so much philosophy and whatever, ultimately, we should just have a clear idea of what the goal is. And when we're practicing bhakti, do not mix other methods and other desires into that process. Yeah? So if we have that, then there's no problem. So ultimately, the philosophical aspect and the learning is not too complicated for us. It's not a difficult thing to understand. In comparison to, let's say, Jnana or something like that, where you have very complicated philosophical arguments that you have to study. So this takes this process of bhakti and chanting purely becomes a process which replaces everything else. So though we have this varna ashram system and purification through ashramas and varnas, etc., which is impractical in the modern age, instead of that, we have the process of bhakti prominently with Nam Sankirtan. So that takes the process of everything else, karma yoga and yoga, stanga yoga, and whatever else you may do. In conjunction with that, the emphasis is that you don't have to go through these stages of renunciation and then meditating on the Lord as we go from grihasta to vanaprastha to sannyas, which is, I said, very difficult and not very popular in the modern world. It's not required to do that, to begin meditation on the Lord or worship of the Lord. So that can be done from the beginning of bhakti. So we don't follow the Varnashra system, but follow the system of Bhakti Yoga. Then we begin worship of the Lord, meditation on the Lord from the very beginning. So chanting of the holy name. What is this meditation on the Lord? We're chanting the holy name. But chanting the holy name includes smaranam within it and shravanam within it. So we use our voice, but we're also using the mind, using the ear. So automatically smaranam will lead to meditation on the Lord also. So this can, thus from the very beginning, we begin the process of worship of the Lord, meditation on the Lord, simply through Nam Sankirtan. And thus we don't have to go through this whole purification process first. So by the chanting of the holy name and the process of bhakti, the purification takes place without other systems involved. It creates the purification by itself, and it surpasses everything else. So Bhagavatam therefore states that if you are a dog eater who's not even in the Varnashram system and therefore very impure by his birth, he's become, a dog eater or whatever, Tamagun. If he chants the name of the Lord purely, even once, he surpasses even the Brahmana. So his level of purity becomes very, very great instantaneously just by accepting the name of the Lord purely. So if we can do that, then the purification naturally takes place. So the process has been nicely provided for us by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Srila Prabhupada, and if we take advantage of that, we could gradually progress in our bhakti, starting with pure bhakti and ending up with prema. Hare Krishna.
Does the modes not affect the chanting of the holy name? Do the modes not affect the chanting of the holy names? You mentioned about the dog eater.
Well, yeah. Well, one can chant in the mode of ignorance, one can chant in the mode of passion, one can chant in the, any mode or mixture of modes, or one can chant beyond the modes. All that's possible. The name itself is pure, like Krishna. Krishna enters in the material world. He's not affected by the modes, so the name is not affected by the modes. But unfortunately, we are affected by the modes. So when we chant, then that covers the potency of the holy name. Name is like the sun, but if clouds are in the sky, we don't get the heat. So holy name is all powerful like the sun, but if we have these anartas and gunas in front of us, we don't get the full effect of the name. So it's all powerful. I have one already. Whatever. The flowers keep falling off all over the place, though. That's all over the floor here. That's why I'm saying that you can chant any way you want, like Ajamil or whatever. And he was definitely in the mode of Tamagun. But the power of the name, even in that case, is so strong, it can cut through everything. And thus all of his karmas got removed. It wasn't apparent, but it was only apparent when the Yamadutas came to take him away and they couldn't touch him because there's no karma there. So even the purification may not be visible to people, as in the case of Ajamil. Nobody knew he was any different. He was still the same sinful person doing sinful acts the rest of his life, even after he named his son Narayana. It may not be apparent, but purification takes place. But that's, of course, accidental. It's not bhakti as such. So if we do bhakti and chant the holy name, that's not namabhasa anymore. We chant purely, we get a much more powerful effect on us. So pure chanting automatically means beyond the gunas, We may still have, and we do have gunas in our body, obviously, and we can still be affected by the gunas. That's why I say we still have anarthas and sadhana. Yeah? But at least in the performance of bhakti, we exclude other desires. Yeah? If these other desires enter, this means we're being affected by the modes. So we can be affected by the mode of ignorance. So we're chanting and doing bhakti, but we're affected by the mode of ignorance. Then our goal will not be ani abhilashita shunya. We'll have a goal of harming others, doing some violent thing in tamagun. Or if we're rajagun, the goal will be to attain material profits or whatever like this, fame, position. And if we're in sattva, then our goal will be maybe liberation. So it ends up with some sort of mixture. It's no longer pure. So Rupa Goswami says if we want to do that bhakti which will give prema, we have to do the pure bhakti. So when we're doing that bhakti, when we're chanting, we don't ask for material things, we don't ask to harm others, and we don't ask for liberation. In that sense, it's pure. Of course, we still have material attractions, etc. But at least in that bhakti, that's not affected by the gunas. So, is there a minimum? Is there a minimum maximum? Oh, well, whatever is necessary to give you an understanding of what is pure bhakti versus mixed bhakti, basically that's one thing. So knowledge enough that we can practice pure bhakti, not mixed bhakti, with contaminated with desires for enjoyment or liberation. That knowledge is there. The other knowledge is, we could say, motivational, or also philosophical knowledge. We have to know the difference between jivas and the Lord, not that I become Krishna as a result of my sadhana. I don't merge into Brahman or anything like that. So we do have to have a clear distinction of being jivas and Krishna and Maya. This is the philosophical or sambandha gyan, and which we get very easily in like the introduction to Bhagavad Gita, things like that. So that's also not so difficult to understand. And then the other knowledge we should get is knowledge of the prayojana of Krishna. Why Krishna over anyone else? In other words, we should hear about Krishna so we can appreciate his beautiful form and his beautiful pastimes and qualities. And so we should get some knowledge of that. This will motivate us for that goal. And that, of course, could be little or greater, whatever, according to our situation. So some of the knowledge is not too complicated. That's Sambandha Gyan, who is Jiva, who is Krishna, etc. And pure bhakti versus impure bhakti. That's not complicated at all. The other, that is, who is Krishna and how we become attracted to him. That maybe, as we go on, we can get more and more knowledge of that by hearing the pastimes.
You mentioned that in Vanaprastha, one has to renounce home and children. It's easy to understand how to renounce children because by that time they're probably doing their own thing. But how does one renounce one's house, like in the modern day?
Oh, I thought that would be easier than renouncing the children. Well, the reason for renouncing the house is the house gives comforts of nice, comfortable food and bed and whatever like that. And in Vanaprastha life, we see the opposite. There is no house. You live in the forest under a tree, or you build a little house with leaves or something like that. And then you go out in the forest and dig up roots and pick fruit, and that's what you eat. So you're no longer have the comforts of nice furniture, nice house, and nice food, and nice clothing, because you take the bark of the tree and use that. So it's an attempt to simplify life to the extreme, so that we get rid of the comforts and attachment to house.
Modern day, modern day Vanaprastha.
Yeah.
How does one owns a house, they sell their house?
Well, if you're to follow the original system, then you don't have any ownership anymore because you're just in the forest with no property and no house or anything. And that may be a little extreme in the modern world, but that's the original system. You're homeless, so to speak. So traditionally, people would, if they're not going to do that extreme, they may go to Holy Dham, and they would just live in some ashram like that, which is maybe common even now for some people. But it's also a extreme measure, obviously, for most people. It's very difficult to give up those possessions. But the reason for these extreme rules is that the scriptures realize that to give up attachment is very, very difficult. But we have nice inspiration because we have these great kings described in the Bhagavatam who renounced everything, like Bharat. He was king of the world with palaces and so much comfort, gave it up and went up to the Himalayas. Many examples of that. At a certain age, they give everything up. Okay, bye. Hare Krishna. What, having darshan?